Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here. I'm Jonathan Ortmans. I'm the chairman of the GEC and president of GEN. And if I've not met you, I hope I'll have an opportunity to do so. There's a logic around why we have a village in the center of our discussion rooms. And that is because I like to wander around that and make sure that I hear from as many of you as possible as to what your story is, why you're an evangelist for entrepreneurs, or why you're a founder or an investor, and how we can collaborate together. So please come up and say hello to me. I'm very welcome. I love to hear everyone's story. I'm really excited to usurp the experts on this session to get to say a few words before we get started, because what you're going to hear today is the first time ever that we've talked about this concept publicly. The fact that at GEN, we have our own programs. We partner with a lot of organizations on implementing their programs. But today, we're going to be announcing and launching a new program that we hope to implement around the world. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of a context as to why. This is possibly, I hope, maybe the only negative message that you're going to hear at the GEC this week. Over the course of the years, we've spent a lot of time, and you know there's a ministerial happening in parallel, trying to educate governments to be more startup savvy, to understand that it's about forming teams, testing ideas, figuring out better ways of doing things, and what they need to do to support startups is very different to what they need to do to just in their general SME policies, because we're about new firm formation predominantly, that first 5 years, that opening part. And as we convince them, we are also convincing them, we hope, to put some money behind their local communities, particularly, I think I saw Eric Page is in here on our board of directors, who's an advocate for what we do in the rural areas, or particularly for those people that can't afford the marketplace themselves. We're hoping that they will be investing in these entrepreneurial support programs. And indeed, over the past 15 years, we've seen an explosion of interventions to support entrepreneurs, accelerators, all sorts of different types of entrepreneurial support organizations. I think everybody in the room would agree with that. The challenge is we've got so much that I've now got 2 countries that will name anonymous, where the ministers have said to me, I'm really sorry, but we're not going to continue to fund these programs. The return on investment has not been good enough for us. And frequently I have the privilege of taking the stage with heads of state. And we speak backstage and they will say to me, you know what? I'm going to get out there and I'm going to repeat your data. Most net new jobs in our economy come from firms less than 5 years old, and this is a big job creator, and this is going to be the growth of our economy, and we know that's important in entrepreneurship. But actually, I'm not convinced. I don't really look around me and seeing hundreds and hundreds of new little companies forming and scaling, not enough of them anyway, to make it worth the investment we're doing. I really do this because I think it's the best piece of education in the world. It's a chance for people to come together, test ideas, create initiative. Even if they don't start companies, they're going to be better off because they went through the experiment and became more self-reliant, and they're going to be better employees. Well, that depressed me. Countries pulling out of entrepreneurship when we've spent 15 years at GEN building initiatives all over the world with now literally thousands and thousands of organizations in every market in the world. So I decided, what is it? So we dug deep and we realized that we had to deliver a rather brutal message. So I was at an award ceremony in a certain country, again, that were mainly anonymous, where I sat around a table and there was someone from the European Union, and she said, in this country, we have $87 million in entrepreneurship support programs. And I went around the table and I added up the amount of money they were spending on entrepreneurship, and it was hundreds of millions of dollars. And I looked at the stage, which was supposed to be honoring the people that were receiving that funding for their impact. And to me, there was a mismatch. So I kick off because I'm probably the only person that can play bad cop to this audience, by saying the spirit behind this is, over the next 10 years, we at GEN are committed to figuring out how do we improve performance of entrepreneurial support organizations such that not only are all of you proud with the impact and the outputs, but that you feel like, especially from learning from each other, for which you do not compete, and if you do, it's friendly, how do I make sure that we have measured the right things that really matter, and that we are able to not just sustain our funding, but to have people knocking at our doors? Techstars is going to be well represented at this event. We have Brad Feld, we have David Cohen, we have people who built, Techstars is a very successful program. They have people knocking at their door. In fact, we're proud to have a partnership with them because we just want to have all the people that they don't have capacity to take, because we want to help them in other ways, How does every one of your programs do that? So part of the step of doing that you're going to hear today, and then I'm going to turn over to the experts, is you're going to hear what are we going to do collectively to work out, have you actually mapped the organizations that make sense? So how many of you utilizing the existing data and ecosystem maps that are available as a first step? Second step is, of your organizations, what are you measuring? What's performance look like? And as an incentive, we've tested this to get people to share data with you that's not just self-reported data. How do we recognize those people that are doing well? And yes, that's a little bit of a meritocracy argument. I'm not saying, Jen, one thing you'll find is we leave no one out. Economies suffer when you leave people out, so that's not the mission here. But we want to applaud and recognize the high performers. Why? Because we want to race to the top. We want them to see what's going to be happening. So that is really the spirit of what this is about. How do we collectively crowdsource excellence and performance such that we have, by 2035, and we've set a 10-year goal on this, a much stronger sense of pride that when I sit at a table and I see those people putting that in, I'm like, the output for the ecosystem of those hard-generated efforts is one that's really not making me stand next to skeptical heads of state, but making them say, my gosh, entrepreneurs are driving our society. They're solving our problems. They're driving our economy. They're the ones that create the jobs. They're very comfortable dealing with disruption and uncertain and unpredictable environments. They are indeed the leaders of our societies. They're not just the people that make money, okay? They're the people who are the leaders of our societies. They're our community leaders. And that's our mission. How do we do that? And we want to do that equally in China. Eileen, thank you so much for being here. We want to do that in all the countries that, I think I even see someone up from Idaho over here. So, I'm looking around the faces in the room. The great thing is that you all have a lovely thing in common with each other, is you all believe in the power of entrepreneurship. I hope that with this project, you'll find ways to share ways that you can improve the outputs to convince the rest of society that the work that we do is powerful and important. And Chad, thank you for coming all the way from Australia. I'm sorry I'm picking on a few people, but some of these people who flew so many hours, I've got to say, give them great. If you don't know Chad, by the way, he was the host of the last GEC in Australia, so make sure you see him. He's got a lot to say on this topic. Anyway, I'm going to turn over to Chris and Tom, who are going to lead this session, but I want to thank you for this, and please help us as we enter this phase of designing this process. We've got an idea, we think we formulated it, but now we're going to crowdsource it with you and work out how do we make this work in each and every part of the world. Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm delighted to introduce the GEN Catalyst Index, which is, as you've heard, is a new initiative from GEN. This project is fundamentally about empowering entrepreneurial ecosystems by mapping, evaluating, and celebrating organizations that support founders and startups. Whether you're a policymaker, ecosystem builder, or entrepreneur, you'll find that the Catalyst offers a new level of clarity and opportunity for collaboration and growth. So in short, The Catalyst Index is a globally adaptable research framework designed to systematically map, assess, and recognize ESOs in any country or region. The index provides a standardized survey-based approach to evaluating these organizations, culminating in biannual State of the Ecosystem reports and a range of awards for top performers. It's about shining a spotlight on the unsung heroes of entrepreneurship and giving ecosystems the data that they need to thrive. So why do we need the Gen Catalyst Index? Jonathan's talked about this a little bit, but fundamentally the entrepreneurial support landscape is diverse and rapidly evolving, making it very difficult for policymakers, funders, and entrepreneurs to understand what's available and where. The index provides a clear data-driven landscape of all ESOs, benchmarking their performance using globally standardized frameworks. This not only incentivizes impact data collection, but it also empowers decision makers and resource allocation. So, first of all, it's going to be very critical for us to define what types of ESOs we're talking about. And the list you see on the screen is drawn from the work of the Center for Entrepreneurs in a project led by Dr. Chris Haley. This list forms a starting point of our understanding, but later in the session, we're going to hear from you guys about the different types of organizations you understand to be operating in your local ecosystem. And as we look at the methodology behind the Gen Catalyst Index, it's important to emphasize that this is not just a data collection exercise. It's a robust, multi-stage process designed to ensure accuracy, inclusivity, and actionable insights. So let me walk you through each step. First, we build local interest and secure funding to support the project. Next, we assemble a dedicated research team, often in partnership with universities, government agencies, or local innovation hubs. The team maps all ESOs in the region through desk research. We then outreach and open calls. We then invite these organizations to participate in a detailed survey gathering data exercise on their programs, impact, and operations. Once the data is in, we analyze it, score each ESO, and publish a comprehensive State of the Ecosystem report. Finally, we celebrate the highest impact ESOs with an awards ceremony and publish an updated searchable directory for entrepreneurs and stakeholders to use. Going in a bit more granularly, mapping is a crucial step. Even though this is an evaluation fundamentally by evaluating ESOs, we need to map all the ESOs to be able to get the full picture of the ecosystem. And we use a mix of strategies to ensure that no ESO is left out. This includes aggregating existing databases, reaching out to local government and universities, leveraging AI-driven search tools, and collaborating with third-party mapping platforms. We also encourage ESOs to self-register via open calls. Let's talk about the data. The index aims to collect both quantitative and qualitative information. We've noted several possible metrics on the screen, but first and foremost, we're going to hear from you guys in the room what data you think we should collect and what will be most effective in your ecosystems. And a critical part of this as well is we're going to offer awards as part of the Catalyst to celebrate those best organizations that make the greatest impacts in their ecosystems. These awards not only provide valuable recognition and credibility, but also foster collaboration, attract resources, and encourage continuous improvement. As you can see, we've suggested some categories on the screen, but this will be driven again by the data that we choose to collect, which we're keen to get your views on. And so if you choose to implement the Catalyst Index in your region, you'll receive a comprehensive toolkit. This includes a step-by-step implementation plan, funding pitch materials, survey templates, data collection and outreach tools, and a full brand and reporting toolkit. You'll also have access to the ongoing support of the Gen Global team, our global network of peers also. And our goal is to make it as easy and impactful as possible for you to deliver a high-quality mapping and evaluation project in your ecosystem. So, are you ready to get started? If you are interested in leading this project in your country or region, please email me at tom@genglobal.org. Thank you for your attention. Chris is now going to explain to you some of the tasks we've prepared to channel your expertise, and I'm really excited to get your feedback on this project. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. So good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Haley. I am head of research at Startup Genome, and I've got a few other hats as well. I'm a big proponent of evidence-based policy, of gathering more data, of demonstrating the value of many of these entrepreneurship support organisations. And myself personally, I've led evaluations of accelerators in the UK, Australia, Romania, and elsewhere. But this is a workshop. This is going to be about you providing your thoughts on the Catalyst programme and on evaluation of ESOs. So what we're going to do for the next 30 or 40 minutes, I've basically got three big questions for you. The first question, which I want you all to think about, is do you agree with the basic premise that Matt has presented? Do you agree with what Matt and Jonathan said, that actually we need more data about how ESOs work, that we can then show that to policymakers, or does that maybe depend upon is there sort of an implicit logic model that actually the funders of these things are rational beings who will look at the data and evidence that we present, and maybe that's not true? So the first big question for you to think about is this project from Jen, is it worthwhile? What does it depend upon for it to have impact? Okay. So what I'd like you to do in just a minute is, on your tables, have about a sort of 10-minute discussion about that. And then just to check you're awake, I'm just going to pick on a few of you just to summarise the discussions that you've had on your table. After that, there are a couple more questions that I would like you to consider, and then we'll feedback at the end. One is the categorisation of entrepreneurship support organisations. Clearly, when we talk about ESOs, there's a very wide variety of types of entity. Does it actually make sense to talk about them under one bucket, or are there some types that are so fundamentally different from each other that there's just no way we can bring them under the same bucket? So I'd like you to think about that. And if there are certain types that kind of belong together, that will be useful. Then the real meat of the discussion on your tables, I'd like you to think about the data that you're currently collecting or would like to collect. So what do you currently measure about ESOs in your ecosystem? What would you like to measure? How valuable is it, and how feasible is it? And then at the end, I'm going to call on, we probably won't have time to do every single table, but there are a handful of very experienced people like Chad Renando, Jonathan Potter, Adonika and Mallory, who I will call just to give a summary. If we've then got time, we'll also hear from the other tables as well. Does that make sense for a plan? I see a few people nodding, a few other slightly blank looks. No? All good? All right. So for the next 10 minutes then, start with that question about why. Does the why that Jonathan and Matt presented make sense? And what do you need to really get the value out of a toolkit like this? So I'll start now, and then I'll interrupt you in about 10, 15 minutes' time. Okay? Good. So another couple of minutes of discussion, and then I'll pause and ask for a little bit of feedback, okay? Okay, can I pause your discussions there just for 1 second? So just to check that you are awake, that you've engaged your brains. Can I have a couple of volunteers, maybe just to feedback what you've spoken about for the last 10 minutes? In particular, are there any contrarian views out there? Anyone who wants to say, actually, this is not a worthwhile exercise for Jen, or it's something that we need to be particularly careful about or could go badly wrong? Any contrarians there? Over there. Sorry, we can take a microphone to Chad.
Excellent thing. So in principle, yes, we need to measure. A centralized approach to measurement is good, but we did ask exactly that. What do we need to be careful of as we do this? So one of them is as far as who we measure. There's a big value chain around that. So lead in, lead out, and the functions that happen in that can be distributed across different organizations. So the coaching, the mentoring, the industry partners, there's a lot go into it. So while we may celebrate one or two that bring it all together, that may actually be a small component within the overall system that they support. So how do we recognize and acknowledge those partnerships that are out there? Identifying the gaps. And so by celebrating one, are we actually omitting other communities that aren't being represented? So make sure that within our metrics, we're finding a way to see who might not be served by what we're measuring the impact. Hang on. And also acknowledging the different stages of both ecosystems and ESOs. So ESO can be just starting out, other ones can be more mature. Also, ESO can be supporting that very early stage and what defines an entrepreneur. It could be an existing business that just needs a bit of a new idea. It could be a high-tech firm. And so make sure that it accommodates that broad section. And selfishly, just to comment on how do we make sure we roll this out while acknowledging there are people that are mapping out there as well? And so are we displacing a sector by putting a global approach in there? And so how do we respect either the localized or national mapping approaches that are already out there and integrate and work with those?
Thank you, Chad. There's a ton of really interesting thoughts there. Any other comments, feedback? Gentleman here.
Hello, I'm Hamad Ihab. I'm leading a think tank consulting firm from Egypt. almost we had the same thing in Egypt. We created something from our think tank called the Egyptian Entrepreneurship Index. We are creating a biannual report as a gateway for everyone locally or internationally expanding to the Egyptian market. It's a mix of secondary and primary data. We are collecting surveys from all the stakeholders, governmental stakeholders, international organizations, private sector, startups, VCs. I have mainly 3 points. It's for sure worth it, but 3 main challenges. The first one is the incentives for all the different stakeholders to be on the same table, because we are collecting surveys and primary data every 6 months, so this is a challenge. The other thing is mainly the follow-on and the execution based on the policy recommendations that we are providing. We created in Egypt this index based on 8 minor metrics like financial inclusion, social inclusion, contribution of the private sector, ease of doing business, also government. And the third point is mainly the localization of these metrics and indices should be localized for each country, not only for each region. So it's very challenging to have the same thing on a global level. So each index may be different, or maybe depending on different indices and the metrics in each country. That's purely the 3 main points for me.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Any other comments now before we move to the next phase? Chap here at the front.
Hi, I don't know if I'm going to have feedback here. I'm going to step away from that speaker. This is awkward. So I have both run an ESO and have worked in networks of ESOs, and I've also been a founder who has been in accelerator programs. I hate giving data to ESOs because it offers no value to me. And if you don't speak to that in this, you're really just pushing that responsibility out on the ESOs, and it's not exactly clear what value there will be to the founder by collecting this on a regular basis, not just once. We're talking about time series. It's really hard to expect a founder to do that. If you don't think to that at all, then the quality of data isn't even the issue. It's that you're pushing more work on the ESO if you haven't given them tools to talk about the value of it. And then the second point is we're kind of assuming ESOs will just do this because we're kind of making a promise that if you do this as an ESO, there will be money for you, or there will be some way for you to standardize your reporting in a way that will unlock sustainability. I'm not sure that's real.
Yeah.
It's been tried before, so yeah.
Thank you. So that's the sort of implicit logic model that I mentioned at the beginning, that we kind of assume that if we can demonstrate the impact of the ESOs, that will automatically help them to raise money, but actually some other parts of the system may also be broken. Lady at the back there.
We discussed the list that you have there misses almost anything and everything Main Street. That is very tech heavy. And depending on where you are in the world, where I am, we deal with a lot of Main Street. We deal with people that aren't going to accelerators and incubators that are ESOs and that are mentoring, consulting, chambers of commerce, economic development. So then you turn around and how do you measure when you're comparing a tech ESO to a Main Street ESO to a government and you're crossing the borders, and is it for-profit or non-profit, co-working space versus somebody that's mentoring? That border of definition alone, while ESO is a very generic term, it's a very challenging term when you're trying to put metrics in place to measure, to compare.
Thank you. So that's probably a very good segue into the next conversation. So what I would like you all to do now for the next half an hour or so is precisely think about the question raised by that last lady. So if this was the sort of list of ESOs that we and Jen had in mind when it was creating the toolkit, but as you rightly say, it is quite focused on high-tech, high-growth entrepreneurship. There probably will be a lot of other types of entrepreneurship support that are not included there. So it would be great for you to think on your tables about how do you categorize entrepreneurship support? Is there a sort of neat distinction between high-tech entrepreneurship support and other types of entrepreneurship support? Do you have your own systems of categorization? If you do have something which looks like this, how do you subdivide it? What's missing? And are there types of entrepreneurship support which are kind of in some ways fundamentally distinct from each other? So you wouldn't, for instance, provide the same award or the same toolkit. Or maybe you've tried measuring some of these using the same toolkit and found that they're just too incommensurable. You can't actually apply the same metrics and standards to them. So please think about that question, discuss that for the next 10 minutes or so. What I should say is there are lots of really good points raised already. Could you please make sure on each table there's at least one rapporteur, someone making notes of these. Please also do feel free to use the whiteboards, and we will hopefully then get some feedback at the end of the session. So the first question to think about then, the categorization of ESOs, what's missing, how do you think about them? Then I'm not going to ask for feedback immediately after that. So I'd like you to think also about the second big question, which is what is the data that you currently collect? When you are trying to measure ESOs, what are you currently doing? How are you collecting that information? What would you like to collect? And I guess we can extend that to say, are there certain categories of data which you've currently found too difficult, but if something in the ecosystem were to change, maybe if there was standardization in the ways that we do this, it would make it a little bit more feasible. Okay? I realize those are quite big questions, but if you can have a stab at them, that would be great. And then at the end, we'll come back and ask for some feedback. Does that all make sense? Any questions about the process or what you're going to be talking about? All happy? Okay, great. Right, I think another 5-10 minutes, everyone, if that's okay, and then we will start gathering some feedback. Okay, if you're the rapporteur for your table, you could maybe start thinking about the key points that you have heard in your discussion group. Thank you. Okay, just one more minute then to wrap up conversations, please. And then in terms of rapporteurs, could I start in just 1 minute with you, Chad, then come to Jonathan, then Adenika, Mallory, and Pumlani to give your feedback, please. So just 1 minute, please, then to wrap up, and rapporteurs think about the main points you've heard on your tables. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you very much. A really amazing conversation here. Starting off with just acknowledging the diversity of the roles and the functions that happen for an ESO in the different types of communities, and coming up with a framework to acknowledge that as far as the funding sources, university, government, corporate, venture capital, what have you, the different stage that they're at, the let's see, find that one. Yeah, government, foundation, corporates, just the different approaches. Also looking at a lot of conversation on as far as what we measure and how we measure. I know we're going to be getting to that into after. But just the differences in the different type of organizations, the different type of ecosystems, and how do we accommodate those different flavors, and also what does progress look like for an ESO? In that, for some people, it may just be addressing generational wealth or generational inequality and disadvantage, as compared to others who it might be a high-tech firm. So just some of the challenges within that, but yeah, really good conversation here.
Great. Thank you, Chad. Jonathan. And sorry, and just before you start, I should say the 4 or 5 experts we're talking to now, in addition to being the rapporteurs for their tables, have a lot of their own experience in ESO evaluation. So if there are points and topics from your experience that wasn't quite brought up on the table but you think is very relevant, please do feel free to contribute that as well. Jonathan.
Okay, well, we had a super conversation here. A little bit US oriented, but other countries too. First point about the categorization of ESOs up on the screen. There's a lot missing, we said, in the categorization. If you are going to entrepreneurship that includes non-tech businesses. So this looks like an equity-based, tech-based entrepreneurship model. So maybe you've got to make the distinction. You know, we talked about Main Street and Tech Street, and Main Street is driving the economy. You know, on our view. So what's missing, if you had a broader view of entrepreneurship, was many municipal governments, chambers of commerce, libraries, universities, youth programs, workforce development programs, CDFIs, SBDCs. So there was that. But then what data would you want? That was the second question. And I think we wanted data on how entrepreneurs benefit from the ESOs that they go to, and how the entrepreneurs benefit is not necessarily in terms of being pushed into startup and scale up. That might not be the benefit. Again, maybe because we're non-tech focused. How many were helped that did not start a business because it might not have been the right thing for them to do? The extent to which the ESOs help people to be more ambitious as entrepreneurs. Did they add value like that? The quality of jobs created. You know, that's the sort of data. There was one other part to the mapping part, mapping the ESOs. Not just a list of the ESOs, but really the connections between the different ESOs and the linkages and the broken linkages. And just one last thing from our group is that there's a danger with this exercise of penalizing the smaller organizations, the organizations that are working with the more disadvantaged people who might not come out so well on a standard score of number of startups and numbers of scale-ups generated. We don't want to penalize them, but to recognize the value that they're creating.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jonathan. Some great points there. Adenike. Do we have an Adenike? Here at the front, Tom.
Thank you. Very similar conversations at our table here. One of the things that came out consistently was general consensus on definitions, not just what's an ESO, but should it then even be ESO work, for instance, that we're then defining. So, for instance, back home in my country, Nigeria, almost everybody does ESO work. You know, we have an SBA equivalent, for instance, that does ESO work. We have universities, tertiary institutions that do ESO work. There are people who are missing from here who do training or consulting services and the like. So there needs to be and you can't standardize this definition without also leaving out people. So again, the consensus on definitions. And then the other thing was around global versus regional versus local. And that there's no way that somehow in terms of this framing that people also would not drop out in terms of the work that we do. And that is not even possible because there are things that we want like a global standard to define. But then if you then look at certain regions or certain countries that also have different dynamics around them, how do you disaggregate that data and that information? The other thing that we talked about, and this was your term, was how do we make it inclusive and exclusive at the same time? Because to be able to measure outcomes, performance, do the awards, if we decide if that's important to do, that standardization will drop out a number of people, but you can't. The danger is also how do you make it broad enough so that quite a number of people would also fall into it. And one thing also was that I think similar to John's table, that this also, at least in my own view, accounts for 10% of entrepreneurial activity in a lot of contexts. And so if I look at this, a lot of people that provide ESO work are not here, but they support 90% of the entrepreneurial activity, particularly if you look at emerging markets or developing economies. And then last but not the least is, again, the value proposition. Why should ESOs do the work? It's a lot of work to be done. What's the value out of it? Is it funding? Is it awards? Is it recognition? And is that of value to the ESO time, or how do you make it more valuable to the ESOs that are doing the work? Thank you.
Thank you, Adenike. Do we have Mallory over there?
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, I'm Mallory St. Clair. I'm Andy's impact manager. So something that we talked about was whether or not these can be comparable to each other. So for example, an accelerator might be very different from a co-working space. And a co-working space might have something that's just a physical office space, but also, say, have some networking sessions, but maybe not a full accelerator program. So what we were curious about is how do we compare all these different types of ESOs to each other? In addition, accelerators and incubators might have very different programming based on just the geography, but also the stage that a business is going through. So kind of thinking about how do we not just define them, but also how would we get these comparable to each other? We also spoke about the different types of data that we have to collect. People at this table collect a lot of different stuff. Sometimes I think they're honestly over collecting data. But the thing is, again, as other people have mentioned, what's the value proposition to ESOs giving data? Are they going to be able to get something back? Are they going to be able to get analysis back? I think that would be really valuable to highlight.
Thank you, Mallory. Just before you go, actually, before you take the mic, did you come up with suggested answers to some of those questions? I mean, there are obviously things like Net Promoter Score, which are used to compare quite diverse types of organisations or types of content. Did you? How far down that route did you go in terms of how do you compare very different types?
We didn't really get into that, honestly. It kind of also depends on how you define success and how you define like a high quality ESO. Are we looking at jobs created? Are we looking at investment garnered by an organization that's been accelerated? Are we looking more generally at like economic growth in a community. So it's kind of how are we grading the ESOs and what's a successful ESO?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Pumlani? Pumlani? Okay, at the back.
Thank you. I was very lucky to also hoover around, but I also share my own experiences. So I think we launched 2 weeks ago, actually, an ESO maturity framework in Kenya. And I think there's two things I want to reflect on. One is the process of how we got there, and the other is how we're thinking about this global best versus local dichotomy. So on the one hand, we co-designed a tool with the ESOs, and that process took about 2 years for us to do. So this idea of like a once-off engagement and then thinking of coming up with the tool is probably something we need to reflect on. So this was quite expensive, of course, and we're lucky to have funding to do this. And then before we finalized it, we validated it with a policy organization that represents innovation in Kenya, which is called Kenya Innovation Agency. So I was there to validate this. So this is what your people are saying, not us as experts, so-called. And how do you react to this? And then we put those two things together, and then we put together a tool. Now, the utility of any tool has obviously a threshold. I think that there's a utility of something like this if it's going to be co-designed at that level, and if we can focus on stages of development. For example, we can accept that the reason we're all here is that things that are generic about startups, like some might ideation, some might MVP, some might seed stage, some might whatever. But there's a growth trajectory of ventures. You could also make the same argument about ESOs. There's a development trajectory. So we put together a 5 sort of staged framework. We're saying some ESOs are at nascent stage, others are at growing stage, others are matured, others are leading, others are influencing. We think this is useful because then you can do a case of how do you move an ESO from this stage to another stage, which is a globally transversal knowledge versus saying, well, who's probably going to win the award this year, which has its own sort of problems. The other piece to reflect on is who's going to do this work. Is it a global organization like GEN, or is it a government agency which has got its own challenges, or is it a neutral organization? So what we find in our experience is that because we're a kind of a neutral organization, which is in an academic university, there's a lot more reception because people can share the data with us, and we are bound by global ethical standards of that. So that's also another thing for Jen to reflect on in terms of, what are the optics of this being done at a global level versus kind of organizations at a local level that are neither state, nor private, nor global. Thank you.
Pumlani, thank you. The other 5 tables, any volunteers from lady down here at the front?
I just want to say one thing, because I know we're cut on time, but a lot of us work at universities, and the one thing that I'm thinking of when you're talking about this is like accreditation. And so maybe if it's kind of formed around that, when you keep talking about a value proposition, you're getting accredited, you go around, do peer reviews, you're doing the self-studies, the universities like it. And so really it would just be having an accreditation team, I guess with Jen or whoever that would be. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Any other tables want to comment?
Thanks. In response to one of your other questions, you were asking about the data collection and like how to make it meaningful. We have had decent results in terms of offering entrepreneurs incentives to respond to surveys. So saying like, hey, if you respond to this survey, we will give you a data insight type thing, like maybe a dashboard or a spreadsheet about here's where you compare to a benchmarked sample. Here's what this might be. et cetera, et cetera. And with some partners of ours that we've tested this out with, they've said that this has worked better than like a $25 gift card to whatever in terms of getting entrepreneur responses. So that might be one solution.
Yeah. So I mean, personally, I quite agree with that. I last year led a review of ESOs in Romania, where that was for the World Bank, and we did precisely that. So that it was a bit more focused on internal competencies of the organisations. What skills and capabilities do you need? What do your competitors or collaborators have? Maybe where are you a little bit low? And they found that tremendously helpful feedback. So that was what incentivized those ESOs to participate. So thank you for that. 2 minutes left. Sorry, lady there in the middle.
Hi. Yes. So one thing that we talked about is it's great to have all these outcomes being reported, but they're outcomes. What about impact? And impact is a little harder to measure because it takes longer. And a lot of times the businesses that are supposed to report so that the ESO can report are disengaged. So this would be something that I think it would be good to reflect on. Impact is very powerful to report on versus just outcomes.
Thank you. Indeed. Got 2 minutes left.
I don't know if this...
I'm sure we've had one or two tables that haven't yet commented. Right at the back. Sorry. Yes.
Hi, Grace Belangio with Make Startups. And I think the other thing that we're not really talking about too is the philanthropy world. You know, when you talk about foundations, whether public or private foundations, they're interested in helping in the economic mobility space. And I think that's where a lot of our entrepreneurs that don't get access to funding also have impact. There's also ways to track that data, and it's not always long-term, which is also one of the issues that I see that a lot of organizations run into, because you get these finite organizations that want to help fund you maybe for 1 or 2 years, but you really want that longitudinal data to be able to update their information, because they want to know, did their funding go towards something important? So I think that's also another discussion that could happen in this kind of arena, where you bring in those kinds of foundations that have the money philanthropically looking for how do they impact their communities. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We are out of time, so I'm going to draw a line under the discussion there. Thank you very much for participating. I know this is a really big topic, so thank you ever so much for engaging in it, providing your thoughts and ideas. This will all be tremendously helpful. As a final comment, here is the link. Tom is there at the back of the room if you would like to get in touch with him, but please do register your interest by emailing him. So thank you once again, everyone.